always, thank you all of us for joining us today on short notice to review with us this terrible event for the people of Venezuela and for the broader region. And we thought we should convene quickly today because these are momentous events and very difficult to predict where this is all going to lead. We want to give you our best understanding of what has happened up until now and our best sense of where this is heading. So let us begin with the announcement that Trump put out on Truth Social after launching this criminal attack on the sovereign territory of Venezuela. And you can see here that he stated the U.S. has successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who has been, along with his wife, captured, he says captured, not kidnapped, and flown out of the country. This operation was done in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. So he's making this sound like some kind of a drug interdiction effort, even though there's no credible evidence that Nicolas Maduro is involved in the drug trade. And then he says there will be a news conference at 11. So around the time we finish this live stream, the Donald will be flapping his gums before the international media. Now, just before we started, I saw some additional claims being made by the U.S. government that President Maduro and his wife are being flown to New York City, to the Southern District of New York, where he has been indicted by U.S. prosecutors for various crimes related to drug trafficking, alleged crimes, we stress. And also the U.S. government is saying that although some soldiers were wounded in this operation, none were killed in action. At least that's the report at this point in time. Now, Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez called into a Venezuela television station during the night to state that the whereabouts of President Maduro were unknown to her and to the government at that time. And she demanded that the Americans prove that President Maduro and the First Lady were in their custody and that they were both alive. I'm just going to show you a clip from that commentary she gave, apparently by telephone, to this Venezuelan TV station. Unfortunately, we don't have subtitles, but you may be able to understand the English subtitles, I should say, but you may be able to understand the.
Ciudad que vio nacer al libertador de la patria grande, que vio nacer al hombre más grande de nuestro continente, ha sido vulnerada, ha sido atacada y agredida. Ante esta brutal situación y ante este brutal ataque, nosotros desconocemos el paradero del presidente Nicolás Maduro y de la primera dama Cilia Flores. Exigimos al gobierno del presidente Donald Trump prueba de vida inmediata de la vida del presidente Maduro y de la primera dama. El presidente Maduro ya había sido muy claro y había advertido al pueblo venezolano de que una agresión de esta naturaleza, por la desesperación de la voracidad energética de los Estados Unidos, podía presentarse. Y lo primero que le dijo el presidente Maduro al pueblo de Venezuela fue: pueblo a la calle, activado en milicia, activado todos los planes. Ha dado órdenes muy claras a la Fuerza Armada Nacional Bolivariana para que en perfecta fusión.
So you may have been able to make out, those of you who don't speak Spanish fluently, she is condemning the aggression and, as I said, admitting they don't know where the president and the first lady are, but insisting that the Americans produce them and prove that they're still alive. Now, after the maniac in the White House announced or claimed that they had taken President Maduro into custody, an image of him appeared on social media, and you'll see it up here on the screen. It looks like he's in the custody of DEA, heavily armed DEA cops. I don't know what you call them, soldiers, cops, paramilitaries, whatever. But anti-war activist Tim Anderson says that this is a fake image. And by the way, some corporate media outlets, as Tim indicates here, did actually produce this as though it was genuine. And according to Tim, it actually depicts the arrest of Mexican drug traffickers, but has been manipulated using artificial intelligence to make it appear as the arrest of Nicolas Maduro. Now, several videos showing explosions in Caracas have also surfaced on on social media. We're going to show you the one that I think is most consequential.
Moscaí, mira esa mierda, explotaron allá toda esa mierda fuerte, tú me estás explotando.
Now, what was most curious about that video clip, which does appear to be very real, that did look like Caracas in the distance, there were quite a few explosions there, is that a number of aircraft, and it appeared from that video, although it's not entirely clear, that they were helicopters, were flying very low over Caracas. Venezuela does have, significant air defense capabilities. You would think that the capital would be the most protected part of the country because of the presence of the political elite and government institutions and also major military bases. Why those helicopters, what appear to be helicopters, were flying so low over the capital as it was being struck with bombardments, drone strikes, whatever they were, is a mystery because those things are sitting ducks. Helicopters for modern air defense systems, especially when they're that close to the air defenses, could easily be taken down. And there was no apparent attempt even to take them down. Nothing that looked like a firing from an air defense battery. Now, why might that have happened? Why might it be the case that they were able to swoop in without any apparent resistance? And well, one explanation is that according to opposition sources that spoke to Sky News, the departure of the president was part of what they called a negotiated exit. So that this was planned in advance, that there were discussions behind the scenes between the president and the U.S. government, and there was an agreement that this would be done with a minimum of violence. But if in fact Nicolas Maduro has been taken into custody by the Americans, and we don't know of any definitive proof as yet that that's in fact the case, then the fact that there was no apparent resistance strongly suggests that either there was a negotiated exit or that the president was betrayed at a very high level by people within his security detail, who basically just offered him up to the Americans. I'll say this, that, to send in helicopters like that with military personnel aboard, without any assurance that they would not be subjected to air defense fire, that just seems unlikely. It seems like the Americans would do that they would send them in, these sitting ducks, vulnerable to attack by Venezuelan forces, easily taken down, and nothing happened. So anyways, lots of questions remain to be answered, and perhaps there'll be some sudden revelation that in fact Nicolas Maduro has not been spirited out of the country and he's still there, although at this stage it seems like the Trump administration does have him. I'm in no position to verify that, but it's a little bit difficult to believe that they would be insisting they have him and that he's on his way to New York City to be arraigned for trial on drug trafficking charges. In any case, this raises the question of who is in power now, because at least we do know that his whereabouts, or we were being told by the vice president, his whereabouts are unknown. The fact that Delcy Rodriguez is speaking to the Venezuelan media suggests that she's certainly alive, or at least she was at the time that she made that call. She appeared to be, although somewhat animated, in control. And there's no indication as of yet, whatever may have happened to President Maduro and his spouse, there's no indication as of yet that the government has been overthrown. In fact, the defense minister whose house was attacked, apparently, we can't confirm that, but the reports are that his home was attacked, which would be consistent with the savage behavior of the American government. He did surface and was speaking from a podium at an unknown location, calling upon the people of Venezuela to resist, to remain calm and to resist. So it seems like the defense minister also is alive and is continuing to, exercise some measure of control. Just removing the president from the country leaves open the question as to who is going to rule now. And I don't think you can assume, even if it's proven that Nicolas Maduro is in the custody of the Americans, no one should assume that the preferred candidate of the Trump regime, who appears to be Maria Machado, this recent winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, who's in love with Israel, there's no reason to believe she's going to be able to assume and hold power easily or at all at this stage. We're very far from a change of government, and we'll just have to see how things unfold. If, in fact, Nicolas Maduro is no longer able for any reason to serve as president of Venezuela, my understanding is that it would be Delcy Rodriguez who would become the acting president. I actually was in Venezuela last year to act as an election observer. During the presidential election, I was invited by the governing Socialist Party, and I was there with over 100, I think it was in the range of 150 election observers from around the world. Many of us were staying in one hotel, a big hotel in Caracas. And, I visited polling stations on the day of the vote. I saw absolutely no evidence of electoral fraud or improper pressure, people being prevented from voting, intimidation, nothing of that nature. And all the election observers I spoke to said to me that they too had seen no evidence of fraud, and it all looked like an orderly, free and fair election. And during the time that I was there, I listened to a couple of speeches by Delcy Rodriguez, and she struck me as a serious politician, as somebody who commands some respect amongst the people of Venezuela. And in general, the people I spoke to at this large event where she delivered a speech on the state of the Venezuelan economy, they seemed to regard her as a serious candidate as well, and one who commanded some respect amongst at least the supporters of the governing party. Her background is that she's a lawyer, a diplomat, and she served as vice president of Venezuela since 2018, and she's held several positions during the presidencies of both Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. She was the Minister of Popular Power for Communication and Information of Venezuela from 2013 to 2014, and Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2014 to 2017 before becoming the vice president in 2018. She was also president of the Constituent Assembly of Venezuela, so she has a lot of experience in government and a lot of experience, I would imagine, dealing with U.S. aggression. It also bears pointing out that in 2002, when the U.S. government attempted to orchestrate a coup in Venezuela, although Hugo Chavez, the president at the time, was briefly detained, ultimately he wasn't taken out of the country, as I recall, but he ultimately did persuade the soldiers who had arrested him to uphold their constitutional duty and to free him and allow him to resume his functions as president, which he did. Whether that'll happen here, who knows? But the Venezuelan people clearly have, as do the leaders of this political party, the Socialist Party of Venezuela, have a demonstrated history of effective resistance to U.S. aggression. If in fact Nicolas Maduro has been spirited out of the country, kidnapped, in effect, don't let people tell you that that the government fell swiftly, because this is actually the culmination of decades of aggression against the Venezuelan state and the Venezuelan people. That aggression included prior coup attempts, as I've indicated, crushing sanctions, a propaganda war, brazen interference in Venezuela's elections, declaring some clown named Juan Guaido to be the interim president of Venezuela several years ago. And that whole project went down the toilet. So this has been a long time in the making. And it's, I think, not unlike, assuming again that he has actually been successfully removed from the country and from the political scene, this is not unlike what happened to the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad. There too, superficially, the downfall of Bashar al-Assad was swift, but it was actually the culmination of decades of hybrid warfare against the Syrian state and the government of Bashar al-Assad. So one thing is for sure, the neocons have demonstrated beyond a shadow of doubt that these people are relentless and they will not stop until they achieve their nefarious objectives. So Rami, before we continue, anything you want to add up until now? I know you had some video you wanted to show of some activity in the streets of Caracas. Is that something that's available to share?
I think as you've mentioned, right, we need to wait for the evidence to make sure whether the facts that Trump has claimed are true or not. We still don't know. The other truth also is that the Bolivarian Revolution is, any war with America is asymmetrical, meaning that it doesn't rely on one person being captured. This Bolivarian Revolution has been built and shaped through the decades to follow the teachings of Chavez. And the interior minister came out in the early morning calling for calm, but also for defiance, to go to the streets and to protest in support and in defense of the Bolivarian Revolution. And as Abu Ubaidah has always said, is that leaders are replaced with other leaders, with stronger leaders, in the eventual case that the Americans did in fact take Maduro, which we still don't know as a fact, and the Americans haven't produced any evidence as just for yet. There's one clip I would like to play is of the interior minister. So let me just share my screen over here.
It's not appearing on the screen.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Yeah, you put there? Good.
Yeah, it's up there.
Nothing to do with the Bolivarian Revolution. It is an attack against Venezuela, against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And from here, from this beautiful place, I call for calm for our people. Trust in the leadership, of the high political military command for the situation we are going through. Much calm. Let no one fall into despair. Let no one fall into making things easier for the invading enemy beyond one of us or another, or any of us. Here is a people who are organized, a people who know what they have to do. We hope that the world will speak out about this attack, or the world organizations will come to you. The world organizations.
I think that to give people a flavor, that obviously wasn't his real voice. That was some kind of machine translation. So you see now that there's the vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, who still alive, still in the country, still apparently exercising her functions. The defense minister who gave a speech from a podium. We unfortunately didn't have video of that to share with you, but it's out there. And now you just saw the interior minister. So there's three senior officials of the Maduro government are still there and still apparently exercising their functions. So what, if anything, the removal of Nicolas Maduro from the country, if in fact that has happened, what that will accomplish is entirely unclear at this stage. It doesn't appear to have accomplished much in terms of changing the political, the power in Caracas.
And Dimitri, if there's anything we can learn from Panama, is that for the Americans to truly come out with a victory in Venezuela, they need to do what they did in Panama first, which is to disband the military and to basically change the constitution. And for now, the state, I believe, is fighting a asymmetrical warfare. It's trying not to be in direct contact or in direct confrontation military with the United States, and instead trying to maybe play its cards right. And until the Bolivarian armed forces are not dissolved, I believe that it's too early to tell whether America was able to come out with a victory just yet.
Right. And they also have popular militias in Venezuela. So even if the armed forces themselves stood down, that does not mean there will not be armed resistance.
I just got off the phone right now with a friend who's Venezuelan, lives in Amsterdam, and routinely goes to Venezuela to be part of the popular resistance. They're trained. So even if the military is disbanded, the people of Venezuela, like the Palestinian people, are defiant and are trained and skilled and know how to use weapons to defend themselves. So I do not believe in the easy way out for Venezuela. And I believe that the Venezuelan government is aware of that, that the Americans will not be able to come up with a victory just as easily as they expect.
Yeah, so before we move on, we want to review with you the international reaction. Before we do that, I'll just say that we have a colleague and friend in Caracas, Venezuelan journalist by the name of Coro. She actually exchanged messages with me overnight, and I may have already mentioned this, but just in case I didn't, she advised that electricity is out in her part of the town, but she has sporadic access to the internet. So she didn't seem to be in a panic, although I imagine she's quite nervous, as are other people in Caracas. So let's then turn to the international reaction. And I want to begin with an article from the Orinoco Tribune about the Chinese special envoy. This was a meeting. Apparently, this photograph was taken last night, hours before the attack began. And you'll see that China's special envoy reaffirmed unbreakable brotherhood with Venezuela against U.S. naval blockade and piracy. And the article says that on Friday, yesterday, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro received Q Zhaoqi, I may be mispronouncing that, the special envoy for Latin American and Caribbean affairs for Chinese President Xi Jinping, at Miraflores Palace in Caracas, the presidential palace. And the high-level meeting took place amid the U.S. escalation of aggression against Venezuela following the recent illegal seizure of oil tankers carrying Venezuelan crude oil. Now, interestingly, I looked just before we began the live stream for an official statement from the government of the People's Republic of China, and I could not find one. So although many other governments from the non-Western world have reacted swiftly and harshly, as we're about to show you, it appears that the Chinese government is waiting. Perhaps their priority right now is to extract their special envoy and his entourage from the country, and then they're going to come out and condemn this. I have no doubt they will condemn it, but I've not yet seen an official statement from the Chinese government. That is not true, however, of the Russian government. They did come out with a statement. You can see it here up on the screen. And I'm quoting, "This morning, the U.S. committed an act of armed aggression against Venezuela. This development gives rise to deep concern and warrants condemnation. The pretext used to justify these actions are untenable. Ideologized animosity has prevailed over pragmatic engagement, as well as over any readiness to build relations based on trust and predictability. In the current situation, it is essential above all to prevent further escalation, to focus on finding a solution through dialogue. We proceed from the understanding that all the parties that may have grievances against one another must seek resolutions through dialogue-based mechanisms. Latin America must remain a zone of peace. As it proclaimed itself in 2014, Venezuela must be guaranteed the right to determine its own destiny, free from any destructive, let alone military, external interference. We reaffirm our solidarity with the Venezuelan people and our support for the course pursued by its Bolivarian leadership aimed at safeguarding the country's national interests and sovereignty." and that'll give you a flavor of the position of the Russian government. By the way, the Russian government was one of the first in the world to recognize Nicolas Maduro's victory in last year's presidential election, as was the government of the People's Republic of China. It'll be interesting to see how, if at all, this crime, this grand crime on a historic scale, affects the negotiations between the Russian Federation and the Trump regime about the resolution of the war in Ukraine. I saw a comment on X this morning, by the way, which I thought was entirely fair. Somebody, probably somebody of pro-Russian sentiment, said that Russia had vastly more justification for invading Ukraine than the United States has for invading Venezuela. Whether or not one regards the invasion of Ukraine as being compliant with the United Nations Charter, I have no hesitation in saying that that is a fair sentiment, that Russia had far more reason to intervene militarily in Ukraine than the United States has to attack Venezuela. We can get into that later on if you all like, but I just wanted to mention in passing that I thought that was an interesting comment. Now, in addition to the Russian Federation, and I think probably even more importantly, because these are regional powers, Mexico came out with a blistering denunciation of this, President Claudia Sheinbaum. Now, this is the Spanish version. I've got a machine translation here for you, which I'm going to read. The government of Mexico strongly condemns and rejects the military actions carried out unilaterally in recent hours by the armed forces of the U.S. against targets in the territory of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, in clear violation of Article 2 of the Charter of the United Nations. Based on its foreign policy principles and its pacifist vocation, Mexico urgently calls for respect for international law and the principles and purposes of the Charter, and for the cessation of any act of aggression against the Venezuelan government and people. Latin America and the Caribbean is a zone of peace built on the basis of mutual respect, the peaceful settlement of disputes, and the prohibition of the use and threat of force. And therefore, any military action seriously jeopardizes regional stability. Mexico emphatically reiterates that dialogue and negotiation are the only legitimate and effective means of resolving existing differences, and therefore reaffirms its willingness to support any effort to facilitate dialogue. It also urges the UN to act immediately to help de-escalate tensions, and so forth. Now, Colombia as well put out a statement condemning this, Gustavo Petro, and also there are reports that Colombia is going to, it currently occupies a seat on the UN Security Council, and in its capacity as a UN Security Council member, is going to ask for an emergency session of the UN Security Council to address this criminal act of aggression. Now, interestingly, Brazil's leader, Lula da Silva, has also issued an unequivocal condemnation of the attack. And let me pull that up on the screen for you. This is part of what Lula had to say. The bombings on Venezuelan territory and the capture of its president across an unacceptable line. These acts represent a most serious affront to Venezuela's sovereignty, yet another extremely dangerous precedent for the entire international community. What I find most interesting about this is that when the election was held in Venezuela last year, Lula studiously avoided recognizing President Maduro as the winner of the election. He didn't deny that he was a legitimate winner, but he wasn't in any rush to embrace the result either. But when it comes to, an attack on the territory, the sovereign territory of a neighboring state, apparently, and with good reason, the Brazilian leader is not hesitating to condemn the aggression of the United States. So quite apart from these regional powers, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil, other non-Western states have also chimed in unequivocal opposition. Here's the statement from Iran. Iran's foreign minister on Saturday strongly condemned the U.S. military attack, calling it a flagrant violation of the country's sovereignty. It described the attack as an act of aggression and a clear breach of the fundamental principles of the UN Charter. And The statement goes on, says the U.S. launched a large-scale strike on Venezuela, during which Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife were, quote, captured and flown out of Venezuela, close quote, according to a post by Trump. Iran reaffirmed Venezuela's right to defend its national sovereignty, territorial integrity, and right to self-determination, and urged the international community to fulfill its legal and moral responsibility by immediately halting what it described as a U.S. invasion of the country. And here is another example from the non-Western world, or at least from outside of the NATO alliance. Belarus put out a statement reaffirming its unwavering support for the legitimate government of Venezuela, and it joined the call for an urgent convening of the UN Security Council, which bears primarily responsibility for maintaining global peace. Belarus emphasizes the right of the Venezuelan people to determine their own future, that right is inviolable. No form of external interference, particularly through force, can be justified. And finally, from a non-state official, this is Professor Ben Saul, the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights and Counterterrorism. He put out a statement this morning at 6:09 a.m. I condemn the U.S.'s illegal aggression against Venezuela and the illegal abduction of its leader and his wife. Every Venezuelan life lost is a violation of the right to life. President Trump should be impeached and investigated for the alleged killings. Hear, hear. Couldn't agree more. This, of course, brings us to the Western reaction to this flagrant crime of aggression. And I'm going to first take you to a statement by the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Kaja Kallas. And here's what the mealy-mouthed former Prime Minister of Estonia had to say. I've spoken with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and our ambassador in Caracas. The EU is closely monitoring the situation in Venezuela. The EU has repeatedly stated that Mr. Maduro lacks legitimacy and has defended a peaceful transition. Under all circumstances, the principles of international law and the UN Charter must be respected. We call for restraint. The safety of EU citizens in the country is our top priority. So there's no condemnation here. There's no call for accountability for the Trump regime. And in fact, by making the claim without any evidence that the President Maduro lacks legitimacy, implicitly what Kallas is doing is lending an air of legitimacy to this criminal act under international law. Really, it's a crime against humanity, what the United States has done. And so another thing that I think is just quite nauseating about this type of statement is that Western governments always call for restraint after one of them has committed an act of aggression. It's not before their side engages in naked aggression that they call for restraint. It's afterwards when somebody is contemplating a form of retaliation against the attack. So all of this is just par for the course. And really, it amounts, from my perspective, Rami, into a sycophantic statement. And it wasn't just, the EU foreign policy representative. This sycophantic sentiment was repeated at the national level. And I'll just show you one example of that. Pedro Sanchez, who by EU standards has actually been pretty good on the question of Israel's genocide in Gaza. In this instance, he's completely, he's acting in an entirely servile manner. The government of Spain is conducting a thorough monitoring of the events in Venezuela. Our embassy and consulates are operational. We call for de-escalation and responsibility. International law and the principles of the UN Charter must be respected. No condemnation, no call for a UN Security Council meeting to address this crime. No indication that the U.S. is the aggressor and that it lacked any lawful justification for doing what it has done or claims to have done. And just a final note on the question of international response. I did check the social media accounts of the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, aka Prime Minister Goldman Sachs, and the Foreign Minister of Canada, Anita Anand, just before we began this live stream. And as of that moment, neither of them had issued any kind of a statement. But I strongly suspect that it is going to stink about as much as the EU statement, and possibly be even worse from the perspective of sycophancy. Rami, that's what I wanted to share with our audience in terms of what we know. Go ahead.
There's some news that just came in on my feed over here from Nahum Fernandez, a leader in the governing party, who is I think the first Venezuelan member of the establishment who has been claiming that Maduro was captured from his home. The United States directly targeted his home. They bombed it, and then kidnapped him essentially from his home. So this is the first statement that I was able to gather from people within the government who are confirming that Maduro was taken.
Yeah. So that well, I'm not at all surprised that they bombed his house. Again, it seems like the Israeli pattern of war is becoming the prevailing pattern of war for Western governments as well, which is to say, rather than launch a full-blown land invasion where you're going to encounter real resistance and suffer real casualties, they just bomb the homes of the leaders of the country. If they can't kill them, they kidnap them and hope that the country will descend into chaos, and then they can easily come in and pick up the scraps of what remains. So, going back to what I said at the beginning, last night after watching, this 5-part series on the war in Vietnam, which I just happened to finish 2 hours before this bombardment began, it reminded me that ever since that war, where the United States did, over a protracted period of time, introduce, I think at its height, there was well over 100,000 U.S. soldiers in Vietnam, and they suffered what are, by American standards in the post-World War II period, very significant casualties. The United States has learned a bitter lesson, one that was, I think, really driven home in Afghanistan, where they were forced to flee from the country. In Ukraine, although they haven't committed large numbers of troops to that war, they have put enormous resources into it, into that brutal and devastating land war. That's going very badly for the United States. And Iraq didn't turn out too well either. So I think this has, in fact, become the established method whereby the United States and other Western aggressors try to achieve their various objectives. The bitter lessons of Vietnam have caused them in the past 50 years, and not just Vietnam, others that I mentioned as well, have caused them in the past 50 years to employ this rather more cowardly method of imposing upon a sovereign nation, a vassal government of their choice. Where do you think this is all going to head, Rami? What's your prediction?
So my initial thoughts over here, and this is maybe tied to our Dimitri, can you hear me pretty well? I'm in rural Colombia, so my Wi-Fi is not doing super well. Am I connecting pretty well?
You just, we lost you for just a second there, but I can hear you generally, yes. And thank you, by the way, great.
Okay. So my initial thoughts were,
I'm sorry, I just want to thank a couple of people.
My initial thoughts, Dimitri.
Go ahead,
okay.
I'll shut up.
Yeah, so my initial thoughts is that, well, if we think about this, since the World War II has ended, during the era of the Cold War, the United States lost some ground in the Western Hemisphere. First with the Cuban Revolution, when the Fidel Castro, the 26th of July movement, was able to establish a sovereign Marxist state within the island of Cuba. And that has led to a security breach for the United States, which was the Cuban Missile Crisis, which obviously I highly support. And I believe Fidel Castro has shown immense courage by showing the world how to resist America. America is a paper tiger, and we need to leverage our strategic assets. Cuba's placement in the Caribbean Sea is what was able to put America onto its knees and protect itself, protect Cuba and their sovereign way of governing for over 60 years. And now I believe the United States is sealing the gap of its security over the Western Hemisphere. In the eventual case where there's a large-scale war that basically takes over the world, we've been discussing World War III. Well, Venezuela becomes a ground where maybe allies could start Venezuela could start putting military bases there, whether it's Russia or China. So it's hard for me not to look at what's happening in Venezuela and not tie the knot with what's happening in Taiwan, where Taiwan becomes a strategic also area where the United States could also launch an aggressions towards China. So I believe that we're currently in a pathway right now where the major powers of the world are trying to seal their any gaps or security breaches over their borders. And we saw this with Russia and Ukraine, China and Taiwan, and the United States and Venezuela. Now, I don't think this is the end for Venezuela, far from it. As we've mentioned multiple times, the Bolivarian Revolution has countless leaders that are able to govern just as well as Maduro or Chavez. The people are trained, and in the face of asymmetrical warfare, America can be defeated. We destroyed them in Korea. We destroyed them in Vietnam. We destroyed them in Lebanon. America can be defeated and will be defeated not by conventional militaries, but by decentralized and uncoordinated, to a certain extent, form of asymmetrical warfare. Kind of what happened in Iraq. When the Iraq war happened, they captured Saddam after what? Just a couple of months. The military was disbanded, but it reinvented itself as some form of guerrilla warfare. And if we look at Iraq today, sure, America has some form of presence there, but politically, America lost. And militarily, America also lost. And in some way, Iraq is more defiant now than it ever has over the last 20 years. So this is to say that Venezuela, I believe, will still keep resisting. But this is also showing us the extent that America is willing to go to oppose any form of sovereignty in the Western Hemisphere. And I believe that Cuba right now might be the next into the crosshair of the United States. And I expect to see larger forms of greater Colombian unity across Panama, Colombia, and Venezuela. The greatest response to American invasion of northern South America is unity of the people. And I expect this also. I mean, we see the threats when America takes over elections and they install their own forms of democracy, right? The Chileans, right? The Chilean government, the occupiers of Chile, the successors of Pinochet are now praising the invasion of Venezuela. And for our people watching us over here, I just want to reiterate one tiny thing here, is that I grew up in Canada. I've lived there most of my life. I have a lot of Colombian friends. Every single one of them told me no one in Colombia supports Petro. I spent over 2 weeks in Colombia right now. Every single person I spoke to spoke highly of Petro, and those who were critical of him were critical because he was not progressive enough, was not anti-imperialist enough. So whenever I have my own friends here in Canada as well, Venezuelans, who've been telling me that Chavez was not democratically elected. Dimitri, you were, Maduro as well was not democratically elected. You were an elections observer in Venezuela. We spoke multiple times of what you've seen in Venezuela, and you saw a democratic process and no sense of interference or of irregularities in the during the electoral vote. And I cannot wait to go to Venezuela to hear from the Venezuelans first and foremost of their vision of what Venezuela should look like. Because if my friends in Canada, right, if this Colombian diaspora in Canada were wrong and they were lying to me about the people's support for Petro, then what are they also wrong about in Venezuela?
Yeah. I put up there on the screen, that's a photograph that was taken when we were at a polling station last year in July during the presidential election. You can see that those are just some of the election observers who were there, many of them from Africa. There were people from West Asia, from the Indo-Pacific region. And as I say, their observations were consistent with mine. We saw no evidence of fraud or coercion, and by all appearances, it was a free and fair election.